An elderly man finds 3 abandoned babies on his farm. When he got closer, he noticed something that left him speechless. The sun rose lazily on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The morning breeze carried the fresh scent of dew over the tall grass surrounding the ranch. A modest yet cozy place George and Martha had called home for more than 40 years. Here, far from the hustle and bustle of cities, the couple lived in peace, following a routine that might seem monotonous to some, but was harmonious to them. George, a 65-year-old man with calloused hands and a serene gaze, was busy fixing a fence on the edge of the property. With his straw hat tilted to shield his eyes from the sun, he carefully hammered the wooden boards, while Ruby, their energetic and loyal mutt, ran excitedly around him. Martha, meanwhile, was in the garden in front of the house, pulling weeds with quick and experienced hands. Her grey hair, tied back in a loose bun, shimmered in the daylight. Although age had brought them certain limitations, their dedication to caring for the ranch remained steadfast. It was during this quiet morning that the first twist of fate occurred. Ruby, always restless, began barking sharply. George looked up, frowning. The dog darted back and forth, clearly trying to get his attention. "What is it now, girl?" he muttered, putting down the hammer and wiping his hands on his knees. Martha, noticing the commotion, stood up and called the dog, but Ruby was already dashing toward the small grove near the ranch. "She must have found an armadillo or some other critter. I'll go see what it is," George said, picking up a wooden stick for support. "Be careful, George," Martha called out, concerned but not stopping him. Following the incessant barking, George reached a tall, dense bush on the edge of the grove. Ruby stood beside it, sniffing intensely and whining softly. Something was hidden there. George cautiously parted the branches, and what he saw left him frozen. There were 3 babies wrapped in simple, worn blankets. Their small, delicate faces were rosy from the morning chill, and though they were quiet, it was evident they needed help. George felt his heart race. "Martha! Come quickly!" he shouted, his eyes fixed on the children. Within minutes, Martha was at his side, her eyes widened at the sight of the infants. "My God, George! Who could do such a thing?" she asked, her voice trembling. The couple stood in silence for a few moments, absorbing the surreal scene before them. Martha knelt carefully beside the babies to check their breathing. She felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but something inside her told her they couldn't just abandon those fragile lives. "We'll take them home. We can't leave them here," Martha said with unshakable determination. George hesitated for a moment. They were no longer young, nor did they have any experience with children. Raising 3 newborns seemed like an impossible task. However, when he looked at Martha, he saw that she had already made up her mind, and deep down he knew she was right. "All right, but then what? What will we do?" he asked, carefully picking up 2 of the babies in his arms. "We'll figure it out later. First, we need to care for them," Martha said, taking the 3rd baby and heading back to the ranch, with Ruby running ahead as if she had fulfilled her mission. At home, Martha improvised a bed with soft blankets on the kitchen table. The babies were visibly hungry, and Martha began warming milk while George searched for bottles they had once used for feeding baby goats. As they fed the infants, the silence was broken by a quiet but emotional comment. Martha gently stroked one of the baby's faces, her tears falling silently. "I never thought I'd get the chance to hold a child like this in my arms," she murmured, almost to herself. George paused what he was doing, his expression softening. He knew exactly what she meant. Since they were young, they had dreamed of having children, but it wasn't meant to be. After years of failed attempts, doctors confirmed that Martha couldn't conceive. It had been a hard blow for both of them, but over time, they learned to accept it and found joy in other things, like life on the ranch and each other's company. Maybe this is a gift life has given us now, George said quietly, still processing what it all meant. That morning, which had begun so ordinarily, had turned into something entirely different. As the babies calmed, George and Martha exchanged silent glances, fully aware that their lives would never be the same. Later that evening, the three newborns slept peacefully in their makeshift bed. George and Martha sat nearby, exhausted but with hearts warmed by a mix of worry and tenderness. George ran a hand through his graying hair, deep in thought. "Martha, we need to decide what to do. We can't raise these babies on our own. We're too old." Martha held his hand firmly. "I don't know how, but we'll manage. God wouldn't have placed these children in our path if it weren't meant for us to care for them." George sighed, feeling the weight of her words. Deep down, he knew she was right. This discovery, as unexpected and bewildering as it was, felt like a calling. And while the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. That night, they were no longer alone. And so, under the faint glow of a lantern, the couple watched the sleeping infants, already sensing the beginning of a journey that would change their lives forever. Dawn broke with a gentle glow, and the ranch began to stir to life for its second day, as home to three unexpected little lives. Martha, long accustomed to waking before sunrise, moved through the kitchen preparing makeshift bottles while George worked on rekindling the fire in the wood stove. The couple's well-established routine, honed over decades, now felt like a blur under the weight of their new responsibilities. The three newborns, nestled in an improvised bed of blankets atop the kitchen table, let out soft murmurs and tiny breaths. Martha watched them with a mix of tenderness and concern. "They seem so fragile, George," she said, carefully holding a bottle. "I can't stop wondering what brought them here." George, seated nearby in a chair, rubbed his chin with a serious expression. Whatever the reason, whoever left them knew they needed help. But why here, in the middle of nowhere? As she fed one of the babies, Martha noticed something unusual about the blanket wrapped around it. Running her fingers along the fabric, she felt something firm, like a piece of paper sewn into the seam. Intrigued, she set the bottle aside and carefully pulled out the object. It was a folded, yellowed letter with delicate, almost trembling handwriting, written in blue ink. "George, look at this," Martha said, her hands trembling as she unfolded the letter. George brought the lantern closer to provide better light. The room fell into a deep silence as Martha read the words aloud, her voice thick with emotion. "To whoever finds this letter, my name is Maria. I am the mother of these three children, Emily, Victor, and Sophia. I never wanted it to be this way, but fate has left me no choice. I am gravely ill, and know I will not be here to see them grow. I have no family, no one to care for them with love. So, I beg you, please raise them as your own. They are innocent and deserve a chance to live, to be happy. I chose this place because I know it is a home filled with kindness. Please, do not leave them alone. With all my love and gratitude, Maria." Martha finished reading, tears streaming down her face. George stood and placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to process the weight of those words. The revelation of the letter brought a mix of sorrow and a deep sense of responsibility. "They have names," Martha whispered, clutching the paper tightly. "Emily, Victor, and Sophia. They're so small, George. How could we even think of giving them up or taking them somewhere else?" Visibly moved, George sat back down, his expression heavy. "We can't ignore this, Martha, but taking care of three children, we have no experience, no resources. What if someone comes looking for them? What if there's danger?" Still holding the letter, Martha looked at the sleeping babies. Maria's words echoed in her mind, and something inside her, a strength she didn't know she had, made her lift her chin. "We've faced plenty of hardships together, George. We can face this too. They need us." If Maria brought them here, it's because she believed we could give them the love she couldn't. George sighed deeply, running a hand through his graying hair. He was not a man to shy away from responsibility, but the weight of this one was incomparable. Looking at Martha, he saw the determination in her eyes, and that was enough for him to make his decision. "All right, we'll care for them, but we need to be ready for whatever comes," he said firmly. In the days that followed, the couple quickly adapted to their new reality. Martha split her time between feeding, changing, and soothing the infants, while George worked to make the ranch more comfortable and secure. Yet the figure of Maria continued to haunt their thoughts. Who was she? Why had she chosen this place? And most pressing of all, did the children's abandonment hint at something darker in her story? While those questions remained unanswered, Ruby proved to be a constant and protective presence. The dog, who had once spent her days chasing birds and barking at intruders, now seemed to understand the importance of the babies. Whenever Martha or George were busy, Ruby lay close to the makeshift bed, her ears perked up at any sound or movement. One night, as the wind howled outside, Martha woke to the sound of a soft cry. She got up quickly and found Emily whimpering, while Ruby stood nearby, trying to comfort her with gentle licks. Martha smiled and stroked the dog's head. "You understand, don't you, girl? They're our responsibility now." George, who had also woken up, watched the scene from the bedroom door. The fatigue was evident in his features, but at that moment he realized something different. The baby's presence had brought a new energy to the ranch, something neither he nor Martha had known they needed. "Looks like we've got a loyal ally," George said, nodding toward Ruby. "Those three have already won us all over." Martha chuckled softly, shaking her head. "More than that, George. I think they've won our hearts." As the night wore on, George and Martha, with Ruby by their side, took turns caring for the babies. Outside, the wind howled fiercely, but inside the house, the gentle glow of the lantern and the sound of tiny breaths brought a comforting warmth. And so, despite their doubts and fears, George and Martha fully embraced their new mission. Maria's letter, carefully stored in a drawer, became a symbol of the unexpected purpose fate had bestowed upon them. Life, in all its unpredictability, had given them something precious, a new chance to love and be loved. Dawn brought its usual tranquility to the ranch, but for George and Martha, life was far from the same. Emily, Victor, and Sophia now occupied nearly all of the couple's time, their days consumed by the new responsibilities of caring for the little ones. Between makeshift bottles, diaper changes, and lullabies, the simplicity of the life they once knew felt like a distant memory. Yet despite the challenges, the love they felt for the three children grew with each passing moment. It was during a trip to the village market that the unexpected began to unfold. Martha needed powdered milk and diapers, and, as always, George accompanied her. It was a routine errand, but something about the atmosphere that day felt different. From the moment they arrived, they could feel curious eyes following them. Discreet whispers echoed through the aisles of the small market, loud enough for Martha to catch fragments. "I heard they're raising 3 babies," murmured a woman near the vegetable section. "They're too old for that. It seems crazy," another replied, stifling a laugh. Martha tried to ignore the comments, focusing on her shopping list. George, ever observant, noticed the tension on her face and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, silently telling her that everything would be all right. But the unspoken words of their neighbors seemed to linger like a shadow, following them all the way home. That Sunday, during Mass at the village church, curiosity found its voice. While waiting for the sermon to begin, Martha noticed Mrs. Margaret, known for her gossiping nature, approaching with her usual inquisitive demeanor. "Martha, I heard you and George have 3 babies at home. Is it true?" she asked bluntly, arms crossed. "It's true. We found the little ones and decided to care for them." Martha replied calmly, though her voice carried a hint of weariness. But 3? Aren't you too old for that? Don't you worry you might be acting irresponsibly? The question came laden with judgment, making the air around them feel heavier. Before Martha could respond, George intervened with firmness. He rarely raised his voice, but in that moment, his presence commanded respect. We didn't ask for anyone's opinion. We're doing what we believe is right. Caught off guard by his directness, Mrs. Margaret shrugged and walked away, but the murmurs among the other parishioners continued. Martha felt George's concerned gaze on her and tried to muster a smile, but unease lingered. For every person who admired their gesture, there seemed to be another ready to criticize or question their intentions. The following days brought more worries. On a sunny Wednesday afternoon, an official car pulled up in front of the ranch, and a man in a suit stepped out with a briefcase in hand. George and Martha exchanged apprehensive glances. The man introduced himself as John, a regional social worker, sent after receiving reports about the children. "Good afternoon. I'm here to check on the baby's situation. May we talk?" he asked with a polite smile, though his tone was formal. George invited him in, and the couple patiently answered his questions. John wanted to know everything: how they had found the babies, whether they had any documentation, and how they were managing expenses. Each question felt heavier than the last, and with every answer, George could sense Martha's anxiety growing. "Do you have the resources to care for them long term?" John asked, adjusting his glasses as he jotted notes on his clipboard. George took a deep breath before answering. "We don't have much, but we have enough. And if we don't, we'll find a way. These babies are our responsibility now." John wrote something down and offered a faint smile, as if acknowledging George's sincerity. The visit was long and exhausting, but in the end, John assured them that the children's well-being was the priority and that he would return with more information. Even so, when he left, the tension in the ranch felt heavier than ever. The next day, an unexpected surprise brought some relief. Peter, a long-time neighbor, arrived at the ranch with a sack of provisions and an encouraging smile. A simple man who had always been helpful, Peter's generosity went above and beyond that day. "I heard folks have been talking about you. Don't pay them any mind. What you're doing is beautiful, and I'm here to help however I can," Peter said as he unloaded bags of food and baby clothes. With simple gestures, he showed the couple they weren't alone. Beyond the supplies, Peter fixed a fence George hadn't had time to repair and gave advice on better organizing the space for the little ones. Before leaving, he shook George's hand firmly. "If you need anything, just call me. It's not every day you see an act of love like this." Peter's help was a breath of fresh air for Martha and George, though the community's criticisms still echoed. Some continued to question their abilities and even the legality of raising the babies, while others began to see their actions with admiration. It was a daily struggle, but the couple chose to focus on what truly mattered: the 3 little ones who were now part of their family. That evening, under a sky blanketed with stars, Martha and George sat on the porch, gazing at the moon. The babies slept peacefully, and Ruby rested at the couple's feet, a silent guardian. "It was a tough day, but I think we're doing the right thing," Martha said, intertwining her fingers with George's. He looked up at the stars, thoughtful, and then back at her with a rare smile. "It doesn't matter what they say. What matters is that they're safe, and that we're in this together." And as the wind whispered through the trees, the ranch felt more than ever like a place of love and resilience, a fortress against any judgment the world might cast. Night fell over the ranch, bringing with it a cold wind and a darkness that seemed thicker than usual. Martha was in the kitchen, organizing baby bottles, while George was outside gathering firewood for the stove. The past few weeks had been exhausting, but the couple was gradually adjusting to their new routine. The babies, now more accustomed to their home, filled the house with small sounds and movements, transforming the ranch's once quiet atmosphere into a place full of life. That night, however, something felt off. Emily, the most sensitive of the three, was restless. Her cries carried a different tone, one that immediately caught Martha's attention. When she picked the baby up, she felt her unusually warm skin. Martha's heart sank. "George, I think Emily has a fever," she called out urgently, and George immediately entered the room. With the intuition of someone who had long read the signs of nature, George touched the baby's forehead, feeling the heat almost burn his hand. Both of their faces grew heavy with worry. "Let's keep her hydrated. Maybe it's just something mild," he suggested, trying to sound confident. But Martha knew this wasn't just an ordinary fever. Emily began showing slight tremors, and her breathing seemed labored. The cozy ranch suddenly felt far too isolated to handle such a delicate emergency. "George, we need a doctor. We can't take any chances," Martha said with a determination that left no room for hesitation. George knew she was right. The nearest town was nearly an hour away, and the road was treacherous, especially with the storm forming on the horizon. But seeing Emily's suffering, he realized there was no other choice. "Take care of Victor and Sophia. I'll take Emily and return as soon as I can," he said, carefully wrapping the baby in a thick blanket. Martha nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Be careful, George, and don't take too long." George placed Emily in an improvised basket to shield her from the cold and set off in the old ranch truck. Rain began to fall, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed in the distance. The dirt road was slippery and riddled with potholes, but George kept his hands steady on the wheel, his attention divided between the road and Emily's soft whimpers. With each mile, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. The journey, which would normally be just a tiring chore, now felt like a test of everything he held dear. As the rain intensified, he thought about how much those three children had changed his life. Before them, the ranch had been just a place of work and memories, but now it was a home. The babies had brought joy and purpose, but also challenges he had never imagined facing. "There's nothing I wouldn't do for you," he murmured, swerving to avoid a fallen tree branch. Emily whimpered softly, and George's heart ached with every sound. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he being reckless? What if he didn't make it in time? But with each doubt, his determination grew stronger. He knew he couldn't fail Emily or Martha, waiting anxiously at home. At long last, after what felt like an eternity, the lights of the town appeared in the distance. George found a small clinic still open and rushed inside with Emily in his arms. The nurse at the reception desk, sensing the urgency, led them straight to a doctor. George explained the situation as best he could, carefully omitting details that might complicate matters further. The doctor diagnosed a severe respiratory infection, but assured George that with proper treatment, Emily would recover. As they began administering care, George felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. Holding Emily's tiny hand, now slightly calmer, he whispered, "You're strong, little one. Everything's going to be all right." After a few hours, Emily was stabilized and cleared to return to the ranch with a prescribed antibiotic. George thanked the doctor and clinic staff with heartfelt sincerity. The drive back was quieter, though the storm still raged outside. Exhaustion weighed on him, but the relief of knowing Emily was out of danger kept him focused. When he finally arrived at the ranch, Martha ran to meet him. She took Emily in her arms and kissed her forehead gently, tears of relief streaming down her face. "She's going to be fine, Martha. The doctor said we need to care for her for a few days, but the worst is over," George said with a tired smile. In the days that followed, Emily gradually recovered. Every small sign of improvement was celebrated by George and Martha, who took turns caring for her and the other two babies. The ordeal, though terrifying, deepened their love for the children. Facing and overcoming such a significant challenge together strengthened their bond as a family. Word of George's journey soon spread through the village, quickly becoming the talk of the town. Those who had once criticized the couple began to see their dedication in a new light. George's sacrifice to save Emily became a symbol of true love, inspiring even the most skeptical villagers. Peter, their ever-reliable neighbor, summed up the general sentiment during a conversation at the local store. "If that doesn't prove they deserve to raise those kids, I don't know what does." And so, as Emily fully recovered, the ranch seemed brighter than ever. George and Martha, despite the many challenges, were willing to face whatever came their way to protect the little ones they now called their own. The soft morning light bathed the ranch, revealing a scene full of life and movement. The laughter of Emily, Victor, and Sophia echoed across the fields as they chased Ruby, who, loyal and energetic, seemed as young as the day she helped find the three children. The ranch, once a quiet and serene place, now pulsed with the energy of three little ones who brought color and joy to every corner. George leaned against the corral fence, watching the children with a smile that rarely appeared before their arrival. Martha stood beside him, holding a basket of freshly picked vegetables. She glanced at him and noticed the light in his eyes. "I never thought we'd hear laughter like this here again," Martha said softly, almost in a whisper. George nodded, his expression thoughtful. "They brought something we didn't even realize was missing. They brought life." The days on the ranch were full of simplicity and learning. George had started teaching Victor how to feed the chickens and handle small repairs around the ranch. The boy, curious and observant, followed his adoptive grandfather with dedication, mimicking every movement. Emily and Sophia loved helping Martha in the garden, learning about plants and picking ripe fruits. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, the couple and the children gathered around the fireplace. Martha would tell stories from her youth, and George, though reserved, often shared a memory or two. "And that's how we fixed the old bridge before the flood that year," George recounted one night, with Victor sitting on his lap, his eyes shining with curiosity. The children listened intently, absorbing every word as though they were treasures. These evenings, illuminated by the glow of the fire, became the heart of the family's new dynamic. Despite the joy and harmony that now filled the ranch, financial struggles remained. The increased expenses for food, clothing, and medicine made things challenging. George did his best to manage the finances, but the money often seemed to run out before the month was over. Martha, ever practical, began selling homemade jams at the village market, made with fruits from their garden. Even so, there were moments when they deeply worried about the future. One Saturday morning, Peter, their longtime neighbor, arrived at the ranch with an idea that would change everything. He came with a group of villagers, carrying tools, planks, and construction materials. "I thought you could use a little help," Peter said with a smile as the others began unloading supplies. Martha was moved to tears, and George, always more reserved, shook Peter's hand firmly. "I don't know how to thank you. This means so much to us." "No need to thank me, George. What you've done for these children is inspiring. Now it's our turn to help." The group worked through the entire weekend. They renovated the main house, reinforced the barn, and built a small porch where the children could play safely. The laughter and chatter of the villagers filled the air, and for the first time, George and Martha felt they weren't alone. The community, once divided between critics and supporters, now seemed united around them. Small moments of triumph continued to shape life on the ranch. One afternoon, Martha taught Emily how to plant a tomato seedling in the garden. The girl, her hands dirty with soil, looked up at her mother with a wide smile. "I want to plant more things, Mommy. I want everything here to grow like we do." Martha held back her laughter, deeply touched by the simplicity and profundity of her daughter's words. Victor, meanwhile, surprised George by quickly learning how to handle the horses. Though still small, he already showed a skill that delighted his grandfather. "He's a natural, Martha," George commented one evening. "It's like he's always belonged here." Sophia, with her curious and determined personality, became the family's little explorer. It wasn't unusual to find her in unexpected places, like atop a pile of hay or inside the barn, trying to figure out how everything worked. The family's unity and the community's support transformed the ranch into a place full of life and meaning. Each day brought new challenges, but also new reasons to celebrate. For George and Martha, the sacrifices felt small compared to the rewards. The children's laughter, moments of learning, and the admiration they received reminded them that they had made the right choice. That night, after dinner, everyone gathered on the new porch. The stars shone brightly in the sky, and Ruby, as always, lay at the family's feet. Martha held Emily in her lap, while George taught Victor how to recognize the constellations. "Do you know what the stars tell us?" George asked. "What?" Emily replied, her curiosity piqued. "That all of this—" George gestured broadly, indicating the sky, the land, and the ranch around them. "It's a gift, and we have to take good care of it." Martha looked at her husband with tenderness, and then at the children, who were completely absorbed in the moment. They needed nothing more. The ranch, so modest and remote, had become a home filled with love, resilience, and hope. The years passed, like the seasons that marked the landscape around the ranch, each bringing new colors, challenges, and unforgettable moments. Emily, Victor, and Sophia were no longer children running through the fields, but young adults ready to venture into the world beyond the safety of the home George and Martha had built for them. The ranch, which had been the heart of their lives for so long, now prepared for the departure of those who had transformed everything. It was a clear morning when the trio gathered on the porch with George and Martha to share their plans. Emily, always the most thoughtful, spoke first, her tone firm yet filled with emotion. "I want to study medicine, Mom. I want to help people the way you both have always helped us." Martha felt a mix of pride and nostalgia as she held her daughter's hands. "You have a strong heart, Emily. I know you'll do amazing things." Victor, who had inherited George's determination, revealed his dream of working in sustainable agriculture, something he had grown to value deeply at the ranch. "I want to teach others how to care for the land, Grandpa, just like you taught me." George smiled, gripping his grandson's shoulder firmly. "The land is life, Victor, and you've always been good at caring for it." Sophia, the most restless and curious of the three, announced her plan to travel the world. Her dream was to explore, learn, and share stories, carrying the memories of the ranch with her. "I'll take everything I've learned here with me always," she said, looking at her grandparents with a warm smile. The farewell was marked by long hugs, restrained tears, and words of encouragement. George and Martha, though feeling the weight of the impending absence, were also proud to see the three chart their own paths, carrying with them the love and values they had learned at the ranch. After their departure, silence once again enveloped the ranch. Martha, her hair now completely white, continued tending to the garden, while George spent his days repairing fences and feeding the animals. Ruby, though slower and with graying fur, still followed their every step, an ever-faithful guardian. "I miss the sound of laughter in the house," Martha said one afternoon as she watered the plants. "So do I," George replied from a nearby stool. "But I think we did what we were supposed to. They're ready for the world." The emptiness left by the children's departure was real, but there was also peace in knowing they had fulfilled their mission. George and Martha began opening the ranch to those in need of a place to rebuild their lives. Travelers, neighbors facing hardship, and even abandoned children found temporary refuge there. The ranch, more than ever, became a symbol of love and resilience. One night, as the couple sat on the porch gazing at the stars, Martha took George's hand. "Did you know this ranch is still the most beautiful place I've ever known? Not because of the land or the trees, but because of everything we've lived here." George looked at her, his expression serene. "It's our legacy, Martha, and it always will be." Ruby, lying at their feet, lifted her head for a moment, as if silently agreeing. The wind rustled the trees, and the familiar sound of crickets filled the air. For George and Martha, the ranch was not just a house, it was a living story, a place where love had triumphed over every adversity. And so, under the starry sky that had witnessed so many moments of their lives, George and Martha carried on, grateful for all they had built. Though the ranch was no longer filled with the laughter of children, it remained full of memories and meaning, always ready to welcome anyone in need of a home, even if only for a brief moment. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.